and welcome back to our next video with all things PSW. I hope you're all doing well. I am so grateful for every single like, every comment, and especially everyone who is telling me that they have succeeded in the exam. I am very glad that these videos are helpful to you. So this is a different type of video again. I did see your messages about wanting more videos on the modules. I will work on those. They do take a little bit longer, but I do promise you I will do that. But for now, I just wanted to share a video with you based on what students have told me after they have written their exam. So just before we start, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and comment in our section below. All right, so we're gonna get started. So I guess what this video is about is just pretty much what was something that came up in the exam that you really didn't expect to see. I know we covered a few things under, 10 random things you should know about the NACC. If you haven't checked that out, please do. And this includes symbols such as the WMIS symbols and everything else. But I have a few more that was shared to me by students who wrote. So I'm hoping that these help you out just to prepare you for your exam. So the first thing that I did here that was a bit surprising was that they asked quite a few questions on the anatomy of the skeleton. So if you remember, this is in Body Systems, which is Module 3, and there was a diagram in your book where you have skeletons. This includes like cranium, mandible, patella, all these things. And these are the terms that they are going to ask you in the exam. But they don't ask it in such a way of, what is this, what is that? They want to make sure that you understand the medical terminology. So I'll give some examples right now. So the first thing to note is that it's important to know these terms because when you're working in any environment, you are going to really need to understand these terms so that you're not asking the nurse or the physician, like, hey, what do you mean? What did you say? So you need to really know these terms. So the first thing that we're going to go through is the mandible. This is the jaw. The clavicle, if you look at it, that's the one that works to support the shoulder. The humerus is that long bone that's in the upper arm. And then the radius. So people get confused between the radius and the ulna, but I always do say that the radius is on the side of the radial artery. So if you look at the diagram that we have for you here, it's just to show you the location of the radial artery. And you see, you slide it right down the thumb. Every single time that you palpate for a radial artery, you have to use these two fingers. You do not use your thumb to palpate an artery because your thumb already has its own pulse. So you always use these two fingers, and that is where the radius is located or the radial artery. And then of course the ulnar is the opposite side. The sacrum is the lower back and pelvis. And then of course you have the carpals and phalanges, and these are your hands and your feet. You need to know where they're located. So the metacarpals are on your hands, but a way that I remember the tarsals is the tar is for T, for toe. So I did highlight that. Hopefully it'll help you remember in case it comes up in your exam. The femur is the long bone that's in the thigh. The coxal bone is the hip bone. The patella are the knees, which I know a student got asked. And finally, the tibia and fibula are below the knee or located in the lower leg. So I will let you know that the student who did tell me about this, and I'm very grateful and appreciative, says she did get asked about the patella. And she also did get asked about what's another name for the shoulder bone, or what like supports the shoulder. And the answer, of course, was clavicle. And they also asked her about the radius and ulna. So that was 4 different questions that she got just on the anatomy of the skeleton. So these are things that you might look over and say, how will they even ask this? This doesn't make sense, but they do. So I'm hoping this is helpful. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to cover is knowing the difference between palliative, hospice, and end of life. So this is the assisting with dying, and I believe that this is module 9. So there's a separate book for this, and you need to look over this book and understand it, because most people that I have seen have at least 20 questions just on this section. But what is the difference with these 3 terms? The first thing you need to know is, as a PSW, you must understand and appreciate the journey of dying. Unfortunately and inevitably, we are all going to die. And this is something that you have to offer dignity to your client, their family, their loved ones. So every time you go and appreciate this, it will really, really make your job much easier, and it will allow you to be there and provide therapeutic presence. So this is a very emotional topic, but it's also a book that you have to learn and read about. So what's the difference with these 3 terms? Palliative care is the first term. So palliative care just means that you receive that diagnosis, and the physician said, you now have a terminal illness. What this means is there's no treatment for it. We can maintain it. We can do different things, but it's going to be progressive, and eventually you shall pass away. A prognosis is how long you have to live. This is where they tell you, looking at this and your stage, you have 3 months to live, you have 2 years, you have 5 years. But this is the thing with life. No matter how long we say we have, or how long the physician says, I always feel that God is the only one who knows really how long we have on this earth, right? So the prognosis doesn't really make a difference sometimes, because some people say, I'm not going to pass away. I'm going to wait until my grandson gets married. And they live despite the prognosis. So what's a diagnosis? It's the actual disease process, or the actual disease that it is. The prognosis is how long you have to live with this particular disease based on the doctor's experience or just what they know from evidence base. So when you're palliative, this is when you receive the diagnosis and the prognosis, right? So what is the palliative care? This is the approach to care with the goal of either preventing or treating symptom management or relieving suffering, regardless of the stage. It doesn't mean the person will pass away immediately, like we just said before, but it's just, hey, you have this life-limiting illness that will take you away eventually. So that's what palliative care means. Hospice now is for patients who have end-stage illness with the prognosis of 6 months or less. Most hospice centers I know, or that I work closely with, they usually do take in people who are going to pass away within a month. But it just depends on, I guess, your province and your territory and whatever the capacity is at that point. But for terms that you need to know, hospice is for people who have a prognosis of 6 months or less. So there are no more options for curing. So hospice is not about, I'm going to cure this. So a cure, what is a cure? A cure is something that takes something away. But there's no curing it because you cannot take it away. So you just treat it and you maintain it, like we said before. Finally, end of life is those last few moments. This is where your PPS is going down from like a 30, down to a 20, down to a 10, and eventually a 0 where you have death. PPS is palliative performance scale. It goes from 100% all the way to 0. It has different parts to it. I have it in other videos. If you would like to review it, that would be good. But at the end of life is when death is imminent. These are the last few stages. And you must be able to understand your beliefs and baggage to allow you to provide quality and compassionate care. This is where you also get into the Cheyne-Stokes breathing. What is Cheyne-Stokes breathing? It's where you have a period of breathing for a while, and then you have a period of apnea. So you breathe, 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 you stop breathing. Breathe, 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 you stop breathing. So if you ever get a question about Cheyne-Stokes, just know that it has something to do with end of life. All right, so that was the second point. The third point is understanding home management and food preparation. So I got another call too from another student, and she said she was so surprised that she had a lot of questions on home management. And I'm like, what kind of questions were they asking? And she said they wanted me to know how to mix vinegar to clean windows. I said, really? And that was surprising to me. So I have put it in here for you to review. So if you look at the home management chapter, it's in there. But as a PSW, you may be assigned to light housekeeping duties. And I always tell everyone, including my students, I'm like, please don't go and start scrubbing people's walls and everything. That is not in your scope. You're there to provide care and light housekeeping. But you also need to organize a home. So you must know like the supplies that are there. You must know what the supplies do. You don't go in there and make your own chemical factory where you start mixing Lysol and Pine Sol and all that. No, when you're in someone else's home, don't mix any products. You can do that at home. Go crazy if you want. But if you're working for someone else, never mix cleaning agents, right? So this might seem like common sense, but it's not. So we are going to go over it right now. So let's go over just some of the most basic ones that I did see in your book that you do need to know about. So baking soda. Baking soda, as you know, removes odors and counter stains. You even can get the baking soda that you put in the fridge to kind of remove the fridge odors and stuff. So what is the purpose? It's to remove odors. So the vinegar one, which the student got, she was supposed to know that you mix 1 part white vinegar to 3 parts water. They asked her this and she didn't know. And then they backed up and asked her some more and they said, what is the purpose of this? And she had to say, oh, it's to clean mirrors. So just be aware. So we also need to know the difference between a disinfectant and a sterilization, I would say, okay, the purpose. So let's discuss that a bit more. So when you disinfect something, and a thing that comes to my mind right now is Lysol, what you do is you're destroying pathogens. Okay, you can like wipe your counters with Lysol and then you feel good, you go to bed because you say, guess what, my house is disinfected. But it's not sterilized. Sterilization is the highest form of, I would say, infection control, because this also removes the spores. So if you saw my other videos, you'll also know that I said the S is for spores. So sterilization is for spores. So the sterilization, yes, also destroys the pathogens, but it also destroys the spores. And the final thing I'm going to say in this section is that you should need to know your laundry symbols. I had somebody else call me and they said they asked her the hand washing symbol and she didn't know what it was. So I have put them in here, but they are in your book. So just make sure you review the laundry symbols as well to make sure you don't lose these marks that are so easy, guys, but it's just maybe things that you wouldn't think about. The next section we're going to talk about, which is still a part of home management, is food preparation. I guess what I'll just say to summarize is that, of course, wash your hands before and after food preparation. But for the leftovers, the key time is 3 days, 2 to 3 days. So if they ask you, how long do you keep leftovers for? Just be sure that you say no longer than 2 to 3 days. And the last thing is cross-contamination. What is it? So, okay, if I'm preparing some meat, right, like beef, I'm cutting it up on a chopping board, I would not then take my spinach and my vegetables that I'm just going to fry and put them around that blood that I'm preparing for my beef. This is what we call cross-contamination. So you have to have like a separate tray for the meat and then a separate tray for the vegetables, or at least clean the tray thoroughly if you only have one tray. So what is cross-contamination? This is when raw food spreads pathogens to food that is ready to eat. For example, like we said, raw meat and the salad, not on the same tray. So that's pretty much it. All right, so I hope you're still there with me. This is going to be a very short video today. I know my videos are usually long, but today you'll appreciate me for making it short. All right, the next thing that we're going to cover is the 24-hour clock. Why is the 24-hour clock even important? Like, what does it even mean? So the 24-hour clock is to ensure that we are all documenting consistently and really being sure that we know what time it is. Because people's handwriting is different. Some people's P's look like A's, some people's A's look like P's, whatever the case may be. By using a 24-hour clock, we're able to look into things deeper. For example, if there is an injury or anything that happens, we want to be sure that we really look at the time to see the events that happened over a 24-hour period. And the 24-hour clock format is the only form of documentation that healthcare professionals must use. So they typically ask this question because, of course, you're going to be documenting when you provide care to your patients. There is no colon between the numbers. So, for example, I have here 0200. You don't put 02:00. That's wrong. So they will ask you this question. If you get this wrong, I'm telling you, you're going to be so upset. So make sure you know that there is no colon. So let's start getting into it a little bit deeper, because I've also had students who are like, I don't know what you're talking about with this, right? So let's look at it a little bit deeper. So any number from 1 a.m. to 11 a.m. is simple. You just add the zeros. So for example, 1 a.m. is 0100, 2 a.m. is 0200. So you just keep adding the zeros and it's good. And look here, no colons. As we get to 12 p.m., which is the afternoon, where you start eating your lunch or thinking about it, it's 1200, 1200, okay? Now when we get into the p.m. hours, it's when it gets tricky. But what I want you to know is you add 12 to the main number. Why 12? Because the clock has 12 at the end of the day. So you need to add 12. So for example, if it's 1 p.m., you add 12 to the 1 to make 1300. If it's 2 p.m., you add 2 to the 12 to make 14. If it's 3 p.m., you add 3 to the 12 to make 15, etc., etc. Until you get to 11 o'clock, where now you add the 11 to the 12 to make 2300. This is 11 p.m. And then at midnight, we start over again and we call that 0000. Okay, so what is the summary? You add 12 to anything between 1 p.m. and 11:59 p.m. Okay, so let's just do some questions to review, just so you can see if you understand this. And guys, there's so many videos on this. I hope I've kind of tried to explain this a little bit more. But these things are very important concepts for you to understand. So this question, you're working with Mr. Smith at 1:33 a.m. for your shift. What is this time in 24-hour format? A, 0133 with a colon. B, 1333. C, 133 with a colon. D, 0133. So the answer for this is D. And why? As we said, anything between 1 a.m. and 11:59 a.m. is simply a matter of adding the zeros appropriately and removing the colons. This is how we landed at 0133. Okay, so hope you understand that one. The next question, you are working with Mr. Jones at 5:55 p.m. for your shift. What is this time in 24-hour format? A, 17:55 with a colon. B, 0555. C, 17:55. D, 555 with a colon. The answer is C. Because this is after midnight, according to our rule, you would add 12 to the main number. The main number at the beginning is the 5 because we're in the 5th hour. So the correct answer is the 12 plus 5 to make 17. So the correct answer is 1755. A is incorrect because it has the colon. B is incorrect because this shows the morning hours. So this is why this is the right answer. So I'm hoping this makes sense, guys. All right, so this is a diagram that just shows you like a picture of a clock, just so you can see it and truly understand it. So it just shows, like, even if you look here, like at the 12, you have the 00 and the 1200. It just kind of breaks it down a little bit more, just in case you were confused with these concepts. All right, guys, so we're going to move on to the next section. So the next one is understanding the difference between Alzheimer's dementia, Parkinson's disease, and MS, which we call multiple sclerosis. So honestly, this is under the cognition module. I do have questions on it, and this is, I promise you, one of the hardest modules to pass. This and body systems, very difficult. So I don't mind repeating myself with these, because somehow some people think, you know what, I think I got it, but there's a lot to understand in these particular modules. So let's go over it again. And I'm hoping this is a good refresher for those who do watch the videos regularly. So what is Alzheimer's disease? So Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. It's not normal to have it, just like sometimes people say, depression is normal when you're older. No, it's not. So the same thing with Alzheimer's, yes, it happens, we see it, but it does not mean it is normal. It is a pathophysiology of the brain. So there is no cure for it. In this disease, the brain cells actually die. The brain shrinks. And the problem, or the hard thing, is this can last from 3 to 20 years. What do I mean by this? You could see Mr. Jones like really just debilitating and going downhill, but it'll take him a good 20 years before he passes away. And by the time he passes away, he doesn't remember he was married. He doesn't remember his kids. He doesn't remember anything. The only thing he probably remembers is the long-term memory where he grew up when he was 4, 5, or 6. So that's why it can take a while for Alzheimer's disease to really, really span. So the cause is unknown, but genetics definitely play a big part. The disease is accompanied by memory loss, problems with language. What are problems with language? You even forget how to speak. Or for someone like me, my language back home is Shona. I might start speaking in Shona. I will just forget all English words because that's how I grew up in my household. I would speak Shona. So I will be with you, you'll be caring for me, and I will be speaking in Shona, and you'll be like, what is she saying? But that's where I'll go. I regress to my long-term memory, right? Eventually, that will go, and it might start to be what we call echolalia, where you just repeat a word like baga, 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 haga, 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 haga. Like you don't know what they're saying or what it means, but it's just language is gone. And then there are changes in one's behavior and mood. So the meds slow it down, but they do not stop it, okay? All right. So now we talk about dementia. That was Alzheimer's. We have 3 stages of dementia: early, middle, and late. The early is when you are aware or the person's aware of the diagnosis. And by you, I mean you as the caregiver, guys. But you're aware of the diagnosis and make decisions about care in the future. The middle is when there's no longer that recognition of friends and family. It's like, who are you? I'm not sure who you are. And finally, the late stage is where nobody can care for themselves. And this is where we step in as PSWs, in that we provide this care 24 hours a day: grooming, bathing, oral care, shaving, hygiene, feeding, repositioning, transporting, everything under the sun. This is our main job. So the individual can no longer remember, communicate, and needs help with self-care. What is MS? Multiple sclerosis. This is a persistent and progressive disease of the brain and spinal cord. As you remember, we said this is a part of the central nervous system. We have two systems, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, which is called the PNS, right? So we are talking here about the CNS, which is the central nervous system. In MS, the immune system, so this is an autoimmune disease in a nutshell. The immune system attacks one's protective sheath. So if you look at the anatomy of a neuron, it has like these little things that look like fluffy things on top of it. It's like a straight line, kind of like a snake, and then it has the dendrites at the end, but then it has this covering on it. It's like very nice. Like I always think it's like a pillow, like something cushiony. So that's what we call myelin. But what happens with this is that the myelin actually is attacked and it starts to wear away. But we need the myelin to cover the actual nerve cell itself. So that myelin that covers the fiber can then lead to problems of communication, because what happens is the myelin covers the fiber and allows communication to bounce to allow the nerves to do what they're supposed to do. So this eventually affects the brain and the body as well. And finally, Parkinson's disease, which please make sure you do see the difference between MS and PD. But Parkinson's disease is another chronic one. So what I will say though is Parkinson's is usually seen later in life. It could be early onset, but typically it's for individuals, I would say 60 and over. But MS, you could see it for individuals who are in their 40s, for example. So there's an earlier onset to multiple sclerosis than Parkinson's disease, but I also just want you to understand the pathophysiology of both of them to understand what they mean. So Parkinson's disease is a chronic and progressive illness that affects the brain's ability to control movement. So this is where we start to see the tremors, the slowness, the stiffness, the loss of balance, and we also saw pill rolling. So I have all of this information in another video. If you check out the cognitive one, you will see it in greater detail. But I just wanted you guys to understand that this does come up in the exam a lot. All right, so those were actually 5, but I just decided to throw in a bonus one for you before we end the video. And this is something that another student told me. So she had called me for tutoring, and it was great because the night before I was like asking her, like, what's a substitute decision maker? What's a POA? She's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I think it's covered in palliative, but I think it's also covered in other chapters, which it is, right? So we went over it. So I'm going to go over it with you because she said they asked her a few questions on it and she was so grateful. But a SDM, or a substitute decision maker, is an individual who is appointed to make decisions when someone is now incapable to do so. So you see Mr. Jones, he finds out about his particular illness. So let's try put everything together, like what we just learned. So he finds out, he's palliative now, and he knows his prognosis, he knows his diagnosis, and he says, you know what, I need to come up with the SDM, someone who will make decisions when I'm no longer able to do so based on my particular, prognosis or diagnosis. So the SDM, there are different types. There's one for healthcare, as in, what are we going to do with my healthcare, the healthcare decisions, but there's also property, okay? We also call these people powers of attorney or POAs. What does this all mean? It means they're legally appointed. This is drafted by a lawyer, signed, commissioned, and everything. So a lawyer is the one to do it. And I had another video as well where I discussed what jointly and severally means, or just jointly. So please just make time to take a look at that video. I believe it was under 10 random questions. So just take time to really look at that video to understand those terms. But the substitute decision maker can also be called the power of attorney. So the POA for healthcare can be called the POA/HC. And this is an individual authorized to make healthcare decisions for a living person who was unable to do so. The POA for property is to represent someone for their belongings. Advance directives, guys, are legal documents that allow individuals to make decisions about end of life. So back to Mr. Jones, he found out, palliative, that he's going to pass away in a year. Unfortunately, he got a diagnosis of cancer. He then decides to draft advance directives whilst he's still of capable mind to really talk about how do I want to be treated at the end of life. This is how he can communicate his wishes. These are legal. Advance directives are legal, but let's look at the next one. A living will is not legal. So unlike advanced directives with the POAs and the SDMs, this is not. A living will is just a written document to let people know, I wish to be intubated. I wish to be whatever your wishes are. But once you have an advance directive and you go to a lawyer, it's set in stone and this has to be abided by. And finally, know the difference between a living will and a will. A will is a legal document. So I'm sure you've watched a lot of movies where they have a will drawn out and someone passes away and then the lawyer comes, they open their briefcase and then they say, this is what this person said, blah, blah, blah. And someone cries because they wanted the house, but someone else got the house. That type of movie, right? So a will is legal and then it allows somebody to state where their property goes to. So the only one that is not legally enforceable here is the living will. So please make sure you review these things. So finally, what I did just to help you is I did do the hierarchy of SDMs. So here you'll see that the legally appointed ones are the ones at the top who make the most decisions. So a father could decide to appoint his daughter as the legal SDM, and that means his spouse won't even have say over the daughter. So it's a very important decision to make. So at the top, the legally appointed SDMs are up there. And if they're not there, the next one is like either the spouse, the parents, or children. But at the end of the day, if someone doesn't have anybody who's legally appointed and someone doesn't have any family members who want to take this on, it goes to what we call PG&T, which is Public Guardian and Trust. And this is something that's in Ontario, but honestly, they're very overwhelmed with high capacity. But they will be able to make decisions for an individual who is incapable of doing so. If you guys have any questions about this one, let me know. Throw it in the comments and I will respond. I hope I explained it a bit better, but it's a very confusing concept. So please try your best to really look over it. But yes, they will ask, who do you think in this particular scenario should be the substitute decision maker? They'll give you a scenario where maybe someone is the POA and then they'll say, oh, but the spouse is also, alive. Who's the substitute decision maker? And the answer is the POA. Because if we follow the hierarchy, the person who's legally appointed is the POA, right? Or the one to make the decision. So that's it, guys. I thought it was going to be a short video. I apologize that it took a bit longer than I thought. But if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And I am actually working on the safety module, which is module 2 right now. And the next one I will do is body systems as per your request. But I just felt I should just come and throw this out because I did hear this from students and maybe someone's about to write in the next couple of days and you might find this helpful. So thank you so much, guys. And please continue to share this video, especially with your colleagues, or if you just started the PSW course, just hang tight. We're going to be in this together. And I will also be working on videos for interviews for those of you who have passed to make sure that you land that job, because there is quite a, I would say, range in terms of how much you get paid. So if you want to get the better paying jobs, you have to present yourself a little bit differently. So I will help with interview skills as well. So thank you so much, guys. And again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.